פרופסור פריש, בבקשה.
Just two brief comments. Tzvi obviously doesn't know Yiddish. He called Yossi Shine instead of Shane. You're right? That's Yiddish, I think.
Shine in English.
Right. Okay.
I will leave them the debate.
The second comment is that Yossi said that he read his email about what his subject was about to be. I don't even read my emails from Ephraim because I always speak about the perceptions of the Middle Easterners regarding X or Y or Z. Okay, so I'll speak about what the Middle Easterners think about the United States. Well, the answer to the question writ large is that the United States is still very, very powerful. I mean, just look at Iran. How does Iran try become nuclear? Well, it mostly does it through negotiations. It doesn't do it through force. And it doesn't do through, in fact, it never talks about the projection of force or the use of force unless, only as a response to the threats of the use of force by others, namely the United States or Israel. When you look at the whole Iranian strategy, it's based on a very, very powerful understanding of American military might. Now, that understanding is based on two lessons. The first lesson, is the lesser lesson, was Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, where the Iranians mined an American frigate, and some American sailors lost their lives. And in retaliation, the United States easily sunk one frigate, Iranian frigate, with the loss of all its crew members, 45, and then another gunboat of 11, and there was a skirmish. And in fact, there were no direct military losses for the United States. There were two Marines killed in a helicopter that was logistically providing ordnance for the operation. But it was clear to everyone who had the upper hand. But the bigger lesson for Iran in its understanding of American might is the fact that it waged a war with Iraq for 8 years and got nowhere, while the United States in 2003 defeated and occupied Iraq in a blitzkrieg that took 3 weeks. This is a telling lesson to the Iranians, and this is why they never initiate talk about the use of force. Even more so, when you look at Ahmadinejad, he basically stopped speaking of the great Satan and the small Satan. In fact, his basic message to the United States and the West was much more insidious. He said, "I have no problems with you." He was the first leader in the world scene to bring up that old question that haunted Europe between the wars: what do we do with these Jews? They're unassimilable as individuals, and they're equally problematic as a state. And he sent an epistle. This is very important for American Jews to realize, because we in Besa always talk about the nuclear danger of Iran. But there's another danger to Iran, and it appears in Ahmadinejad's rhetoric, his danger to the Jewish people. He sent an epistle to Merkel, the German chancellor, which to this day the Germans have not published, because it was so insidious. It was so much a return to Nazi Germany in the 30s, what we do with the Jews. But it's also a recognition of American power. I don't want to fight the Americans. I just want to deal with the Jewish problem, which is a problem we both share. You also look at Syrian rhetoric. I'll just give you an example of how much Syria recognizes American might. There was this Chola so-called massacre in a village, because I say so-called because I don't believe almost anything that comes out of Syria. It's all doctored, very similar to how the Palestinians doctor things in propaganda against Israel. Well, Clinton said, "We're disgusted to see what we see happening. This regime-sponsored violence that we witnessed again in Hama yesterday is simply unconscionable. And Syria cannot be peaceful, stable, or certainly democratic until Assad goes." And then a US official wrote, publicized that Assad is a dead man walking. When you look at Assad's speech the next day, there is absolutely no reference to the United States. When you look into the Al-Ba'ath newspaper site, there is almost no condemnation of the United States. He treads a very, very careful path because they know what American might is all about. And there are plenty of other examples. Iran has not reacted to the brutal suppression of the Shiites in Bahrain. They don't do it not because they don't want to do something about it, but because they're afraid of American reaction. Hezbollah and Hamas would love to engage in international terrorism. Hezbollah used to, but refrains from doing so because of a powerful United States. So the United States is still very powerful. Now, it is true that immediately after the ouster of Abidin bin Ali and Mubarak, that there was a sense of American loss of allies and therefore of American decline. But even that was reduced considerably, that kind of talk, after the Libyan intervention. I mean, Zvi talked about the fact that the Americans took the back seat. From the point of view of the Middle Easterners, Iranians or Arabs, the French and the British are simply part of the American team. It's been many, many years since conflict was perceived between France and the United States. In Lebanon, the United States has been working closely with France, and today they're all perceived as part of one team, and of course they're the very, very junior partners. So the Libyan intervention brought American might back to the fore. Now let me just look at some of the sectors that make up sort of public opinion in the Middle East. I'll start with the professional media class. Well, obviously with democratization, and there is democratization in the sense that the street and that the vote is becoming more important in the Arab world, at least in those states which have gone through an Arab Spring. I think this professional class is much less important. That's how when I look at the posts in Al-Aram to these professional media people, there isn't much interest. But in as much as they write, first of all, there's a professionalization and a globalization of commentary. In other words, if you took their Arab names or their even Iranian names off the article, you wouldn't know who wrote the article. Basically, there are two themes that they develop. One is whether America is temporarily overextended, and some claim, just very much like anywhere else, whether the United States is structurally overextended or being outbidded by competing forces, namely China. But most of all, there's a reflection that Chinese power, while on the rise, is still very much beyond the horizon and really can't carry any clout in the Middle East. A third theme I haven't seen in local press, and that's basically whether the United States is fine-tuning a more offshore balancing policy towards the Middle East, which is very much, this is a concept that has been developed by Mearsheimer and other realists, Lane, and that hasn't developed, which I think is worthy of exploration. Of course, the people most disappointed with American policy, and that's nothing new, is the moderate Arab rulers, basically the monarchs and the princes of the Arab world. But even then, the fear of American decline in the Middle East, even amongst them, has abated. And for good reason, because it's actually America stepping back that brought about maybe the few successful interventions by Arab states in the affairs of others in the last 30 years, namely the intervention, the Saudi Arabian and Jordanian intervention in Bahrain. So basically, the American withdrawal from the Middle East has empowered rather than weakened at least some of America's major allies. And there's certain, and now and it's empowered them in making, finally Saudi Arabia has signed a death warrant on the Syrian regime. For many years it tried wooing the Syrians out of the Iranian camp. Now it sufficiently feels strong enough to really get to the jugular vein of the Syrian regime. So in many ways, I mean, the monarchs are stronger because the Americans stepped back. Another public which is very important is the Muslim Brotherhood. And I challenge anyone here to look into the Ikhwan line in Arabic to see any condemnation of the United States. Again, they're very, very guarded. They hate the United States, that's obvious, but they don't say it obviously because they think that the United States is a power to be reckoned with, and it's a power of which it's not worth becoming an enemy. Finally, I get to the general educated public. And here I would say, for the first time, I think, since before 1967, there are two states that are more maligned and criticized than the United States. This is a fantastic achievement for the United States, that China and Russia are the barbs of criticism more so than the United States. And the Middle Easterners basically are really ambivalent about the United States, in the same way they're ambivalent over Syria. The Syrian regime, their expressions towards the Syrian regime is very much an expression of how they view the United States. On the one hand, they think Syria is really the only power that has not fought, but stood up against the West. But on the other hand, the Syrian regime is collaborating with the killers of the Sunni Muslims, and they are killing Sunni Muslims. So basically, most of the Arab public, both towards the United States and towards the Syrian problem and the problem in Yemen, they're ashamed, apathetic, hardly read these articles because they're so depressing, and even less react to them. I just like to end with two very, very brief comments on Rafi's questions. I think the United States is very consistent, and the United States is very consistent in its policy towards the United States since the Arab Spring. It's basically supported democracy when it served its interests and has done nothing and doesn't engage in democratic rhetoric in Bahrain where it would operate against its interests. And not only has it been consistent, I think it's been initiative. For instance, I'll give you an example. Mubarak. To support the ouster of Mubarak shows a good deal of entrepreneurship. They realized, the Americans quickly and sagaciously realized that the military wanted Mubarak out, that the military had possibly the ability of engineering a more or less successful transition in Egypt, and that's going to be tested, and the Americans worked with the military to achieve it. So I think the administration receives quite high marks, and I think that the American position in the Middle East is pretty good, and certainly rhetorically has never been better. Thank you very much.